Okay, those last few yards into the main camp now. There's been so much going on down here, and it's, you know, it's obviously, I'm sad that we're in lockdown, but that's just the way it goes. Here we are, we're into main camp now. I'm going to head straight to the fire pit, the business end of where we're going to be today. Hopefully you guys can all see this. Now, just as we're getting started, I'll just take my bag off. We're going to need a few bits and pieces because it's a bit like baking a cake. And some of those are, so here's my basket of feather sticks that some previous clients have been making. So we'll place those down. And we're probably also going to need some decent kindling. So grab a bag of that. Okay, so that's that. Right, let's get started. You guys can come with me. I'm going to try to set this up so that it's over the top and you can see both me and my hands and what I'm doing. Let's see here. Okay, so here we are, we're in the fire pit. The chosen area for you to have your fire will obviously be different and varying, but as long as it's safe to do so. Obviously at home, if you're in a wood burner or if you're using a solid fuel cooker, that's kind of an established area. But today we're going to be up here on our raised fire pit. So ingredients, a bit like baking a cake as I referred to earlier. You're going to need tinder and kindling. You can eliminate both these problems in one go by making feather sticks. Okay, so tinder is your light, fluffy, soft, easily combustible material that gets that initial flame going. Okay, so from your ignition source, that could be a lighter or a match or however you choose to start your fire, into that tinder that starts the flame off, and then once that gets going, goes into some slightly thicker kindling. Now today, I've got some chunks of Douglas fir. These are offcuts from making the cabin, so these will be ideally suitable for what we're doing. You'll have whatever you get hold of at home, whether it's going to be feather sticks or whether it's going to be some sort of a shop bought fire logs. There's a whole world of stuff out there you can get your hands on. But as I said, fundamentally, having something like a feather stick is ideal because you can light this end and then once it gets going, this end will start to take, and then you can jump into slightly thicker bits of wood. Always take time to plan. One of the biggest things and biggest takeaways from my time as Royal Marines Commando is always probably going to be that fundamental, the 7 Ps, okay? So prior planning and preparation prevents poor performance. And that's it in a nutshell, okay? So you know, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail, and making fire is exactly so. You might be down to your last match and you want to make sure you've got everything set up and good to go before you just go in there willy-nilly trying to set fire to maybe something like this with the match. It just isn't going to happen, guys. Okay, so first thing I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to build myself some sort of platform to make my fire on. Now at home, think about this. Inside your wood burner, you have a grate that has gaps. And these gaps are really, really important because it's one of those key parts to what we call the fire triangle. So hopefully at home you know what I'm on about, but if not, okay, so I'm going to draw out an imaginary triangle, and you need key elements in each corner of this triangle to make it go. Okay, so you're going to need fuel. Whatever that fuel may be, today I'm in the woods, it's going to be bits of wood. Oxygen. A fire needs to breathe just the same as we do, okay, so oxygen is key. And then the H that sits above at the top of the triangle, okay, is going to be heat that's produced. Okay, when I put the ignition source in on these two, I get that heat, and that pretty much completes the fire triangle. So whenever we think about making a fire, we need to think about paying respects to each of those 3 key elements. The H at the top could also, I've heard it said, count for being height, because it's all about creating a thermal column. Heat rises, guys, okay, so fire always goes up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay myself a little raft. Now the reason I do this in the outdoors is because there is an invisible moisture layer all the way along the forest floor at all times of the year. Don't mistake that. Even in the summertime, there's probably 3 or 4 inches of moisture on the bottom there, and the moment you place all your bits of wood down, that moisture is jumping in to that wood and making that bit harder to make your fire. In the winter time, it's probably a good 12 inches off the floor. So when we cover things like fire by friction and things like that, it's imperative that you keep all of your bits and pieces up off the floor until it's time to go for it and make your fire. So platform, okay, so first thing you need to know is make a platform or a raft. The other reason for this is if I've got my pieces of wood laid down like this, say 3 or 4 thick, and I leave a nice gap in the middle, the airflow can move along here and go up underneath and into the fire. So I've got this constant airflow, and that's where you start to consider wind direction. So which way is the wind going today, and how could I find that out? Well, I could either drop some dust or some ash from the fire, but that's not really telling me an awful lot because it's a very gentle breeze today. So I'm more likely, I'll be better off licking the back of my hand and just taking a moment to rotate my hand around to feel where that wind is actually coming from. Okay, so we've got a slight south-southwesterly today, which is useful to us. So the way in which I lay these down, I would lay them so that the wind has opportunity to move along here. Okay, so I'm just going to, and I'm going to place down my raft of kindling. Okay, and again, this means my fire is up off the floor, and it means that the airflow can move along. Okay, so the wind is coming in here. I'm expecting to see the smoke going out the back here. We'll see what happens. But it's got flow for these air channels underneath, but primarily it's getting the fire up off the deck. Okay, so I've made my little raft. The next thing I'm going to need to do is place in my kindling, which for the purposes of today will be a couple of feather sticks like so, and I'm going to light these with a lighter quite simply and lay those down and get those started. Sometimes I'll snap the feather sticks like this, okay, and what I'll do is I'll lay that back over the top so that it's lit, and then I've got some slightly thicker kindling over the top. So that's quite a good technique. Don't know if anyone else does this. Snap them and then fold them like that. Snap them and fold them so that I've got that nice dense bundle that's going to catch a fire. It's going to catch flame, sorry, and then can begin to lay things on top. Now the very first fire lay that we're going to make or learn to make is the crisscross fire lay, and this is just like making a game of Jenga, guys. Okay, so let me just get my lighter out of my pocket, just a pretty standard lighter. I'm going to light the underneath of this, lay a few more bits and pieces on here, and then I'm going to start to lay my kindling from my bag alongside, so I've got it to hand and it's good to go. Okay, top tip, any burnt ends that you can find from a previous fire are always useful because they take an awful lot less energy to get going, because that process of carbon release is already well into mid-float and happening here. So any kind of what I call dog ends, they look like a burnt piece of meat that you'd normally give to your dog. Okay, there we go. I'll put them there. Now I'm just going to literally light the underneath of this. Obviously I've got that airflow, everything's coming up, and as soon as I start to place on all of my bits of kindling in a nice crisscross fashion, I'm gonna create our first fire lay, okay, and that is the crisscross fire. So today I'm going to be showing you 4 of my very best fire lays and ways of laying your fire, should I say, so that you can maintain and sustain a fire in any weather. So the first one we're going to learn today is the crisscross fire, and this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to light the fire and then lay the kindling on top in a crisscross fashion. Hopefully you can see this starting to take place. Now it's a bit wobbly to start with, the platform always is, it's all a bit of a balancing game. Trying to get it to sit still. You can see what's happening now. You've got these air gaps, okay, coming through. You've got the fuel in abundance, and we're creating that thermal column. There are key factors towards creating this fire and making it go. And now that the fire is starting to establish itself, you can see that smoke direction. You can see that wind coming in, taking that smoke away from me here. And you can see how this is really in its entirety and in its operation, it's working really, really efficiently. The Starfire sees me feeding in, probably classically about 4 pieces into each corner to get them started. And you'll notice, because we built that raft, the benefit here is because we took the time to build that raft, we already have a slight bit of elevation here. The purpose of a Starfire is because it's incredibly fuel efficient. So it's the total opposite of the Crisscross Fire in that it's not using anywhere near as much fuel. If I was making a fire in a scalloped out dip or bowl, of course this encourages the flame to work back up along the material, and I would find all the energy had gone completely from the campfire. So by having it slightly raised up, I'm maintaining all of that heat source in the top here. Yes, it might go out after I've been away for an hour or two, but it's quite easy to come back, push these in together, give them a bit of a blow, and they live again. Okay, another top tip. If you're in the outdoors, not so much in your wood burner at home because that has a controllable airflow, putting your fingers together and making a little star shape, hopefully you can see that, okay, and blowing through from here, I can blow from a distance that's a bit further back than having to stick my whole head in the fire as thus. Okay, what I can do is sit back here. Now the thickness of my lips plus the thickness of my fingers gives me that tunneling effect and allows me to introduce that oxygen into the base of the fire if I feel it needs a bit of a push. Okay, so this is the Starfire or the Hunter fire, and then we're going to move on to our next fire, which is really important in bad weather, and it's the only fire that I've seen survive a pretty serious storm, okay, and that's called the V fire. Okay, so for the V fire, let's say the wind direction is blowing in here, it's blowing an absolute gale in here, and the wind is just coming across the landscape at some ridiculous speed, and for all intents and purposes this would get pushed off and just broken up across the forest floor. What I'm going to do now is start to create what we call a V fire. Hopefully this all makes total sense, and it's also very much partly a self-feeding fire, which I know there's a lot of fascination about with the people in the outdoors. Everyone wants to make that self-feeding fire because it's all about making life easier for ourselves in the outdoors. So you can see what I'm doing. I'm creating that V straight away. And the intention and the idea is to maintain the flame at the back end here. So the wind is funneling into the V, feeding it constant oxygen, which is great. And you're just going to keep piling the timber over the top. And in a really bad storm, this is brilliant. Okay, and then you can start to actually cover over the front even and protect it if it's really, really blowing as thus. And what happens is as each piece of timber burns through, the next one falls down, they fall down on top of each other, and it keeps self-feeding right the way down and keeping that flame in at the back. Let me see if I can show you what's happening now. I mean, we haven't really got the wind stresses to demonstrate this beautifully, but the flame is happening at the back here, okay, and as each piece of wood, spin round, as each piece of wood burns down and burns through the end of, the next piece lays on top of it. So yeah, if you do get that sudden huge gusting storm come in, creating a V fire may just be the difference between you being able to restart your fire very easily or maintain that fire the whole way through. That's the idea. and you having to completely start from scratch after there's been a massive storm and all of your timber is sodden through. You're having to break into larger logs to downsize that stuff to get the dry stuff out of the middle. Okay, so this is the V fire. So the last fire lay I'm going to show you guys today is the one that I would sleep next to. Now obviously my fire pit by relative scale is not quite head to toe, but what we're talking about here is the long log fire, where we get two small sized trees or elongated timber branches, and we're trapping and moving that ember base in between the two to create a nice wall of flame, which is giving us constant heat head to toe. True story, a couple of winters ago I did a little exercise at about -4 at night, no sleeping bag and no water for about 3 days, and I just had to maintain those basic core fundamental skills. I did pretty well. I'm not gonna lie, it actually got quite boring towards the end, just constantly foraging for food, finding water and purifying water and going through that cycle. But this is what you'll do. Okay, the long log fire. If I was going to bed down for the night, actually spend the night, let's say I was on this increment here, obviously not inside the fire pit, I would have built my raised bed just above, so on that side, so that I'm maximising the heat. As the heat's rising away from the fire, I'm maximising opportunities to embrace that heat and to gain from it. And I would orientate this fire and its embers in such a way that I'm feeling the heat top to toe. So this is about the longest stick I could find in the camp right now. You're probably looking at this sort of length as a minimum. You probably want small diameter trees about this big, ideally deadwood, and ideally hardwood. So learning to recognise your trees, okay, is really important. From a star fire, we're going to turn it into a long log fire. So you're going to want to drag your embers along and create that wall. So all of my hot coals are now all the way along here, and you'd be going long enough to go head to toe. So if you're 6 foot, probably make it 7 foot just to be safe. Whatever works for you guys. And you've got to think about your wind direction too. So sleeping that side would probably be not such a bad choice right now, because you can see what the smoke's doing. I'm getting a face full of it. Let me come round. So if I was to be sleeping here, I'd be feeling the effects of the heat, if this was long enough, head to toe the whole way along. And I'd be using decent diameter small trees, deadwood and hardwood. This happens to be a piece of hawthorn, okay, and I can identify that from its bark and from the wood itself. This would be the perfect sort of wood to be using for this, because the incredible amount of BTUs in terms of heat given off by something like hawthorn, if we look back to the old rhyme, it is by the Irish said that hawthorn bakes the sweetest bread. This would be a fantastic choice for sleeping next to a long log fire. So once this lot really gets going and established, you'll be able to see that wall of flame. So now it's starting to establish a little bit. You can see what I've done is I've used the slightly thicker diameter stuff on the outside edges, and then put some more combustible kindling in the middle just to rev this thing up. And then all I'm going to do is push these together to create a long log fire and really build that ember base in the middle. Reality is, if I'm out in the woods and doing this for real, okay, as in I'm going to spend the whole night next to this, these smaller pieces and limbs like this would be reserved for my star fire through the day, and whole trees or small trees would be used, singular pieces, so that ember bed is trapped between two singular pieces, giving me that warmth. Also note, see my knees, I'm about 1.5 steps away from the fire, and that's probably the ideal distance. If I was going to sleep here, I'd want to be about 1.5 steps away from that fire, so I'm maximising the heat I'm feeling, but I'm not putting myself at danger. Okay, last point on this one, if you're going to sleep next to it, and at some point I'll probably just go ahead and do the whole full thing and sleep out next to a long log fire for you guys so you can see it in action, is think about your wind orientation. So right now the wind is coming across, so I would always orientate my camp slightly, so side on into the wind, but ever so slightly in my favour, as in back to the wind. Not with the wind coming from behind me, because it will just go over the top of your shelter, hit the smoke and eddy back into your face. Check out our video on shelter making. I think there's a model in there that we definitely spoke about that covers that. Okay, so that's the 4th fire lay, and that pretty much concludes today's little taking you guys through. Hopefully that answers a lot of the questions. If it hasn't and you still have questions, put them in the box below, in the comments box. Let's discuss that. Okay, I might even get on and do a live at some point as well, so we can hash through anything you've seen on our videos, and we can kind of really judge that up and you know, see what you guys think. I'm really interested. What are your favorite methods of making fire? Let me know. Let's talk about it. Cheers. Thanks for now. If you liked what you saw today in today's video, make sure you hit the like button, tell all your friends, and obviously subscribe please, because that enables us to keep going and keep moving forward with this. And have a good day. Cheers. Bye.